John, we'll get Chris to call you and Steve on the phone if you can coach him to. This is Chris right there. So Chris is going to try to text me so we can get John, who's right there.
Oh, you just about poked me in the eye.
To work on.
You didn't need that eye anyway, John. Stand by in 3, 2, 1. You're live.
Hello, 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 Santa Barbara. It's your chantress of everything valuable and beautiful, Elizabeth Stewart. And what a lineup we have. We're celebrating the 21st annual Ojai Film Festival. And the film festival, of course, this year is virtual, taking place November 6th through the 15th. Yeah. And today to talk a little bit about the film festival, I have wonderful cast, I guess you could say, of filmmakers and artists. I have Michael Love with me. I have John Sasser with me. I have Christopher Sladoff, Michael Schimmel, and we also have the artist Christopher, well, we said that already, Christopher Sladoff. We're a little trouble with his audio, but we'll get him connected pretty soon. Bruce Goldish is here, who is the theme of Michael Love's film. And it's so amazing that Bruce is here, actually, because I used to just, everybody who's in Santa Barbara has heard him play. So if you've walked down State Street and you shop, what is it Marshall's there? But if you shop down the street, you know, you'll have heard the echoey, beautiful sound of his guitar. And just a little shout out, which is really kind of prescient, impressive at the same time. Bruce is a ICU nurse and he deals with patients in the COVID ward here. And so we've got a double whammy with Bruce right now. But I want to start the hour by asking a question, maybe in roundtable fashion, and I want to specifically direct this to Matthew, Michael, and John, our filmmakers. So let's say you three, if there's a filmmaker, a budding filmmaker who's just planning, okay, let me see how to lay out my first attempt at making a film, what would be the biggest hurdle for that young person? Let me start with Matthew. So Matthew, you know, if you're counseling someone who would like to jump off and make a film, and you would say, well, okay, so there's great things about it, but the real sticky point, the tar pit that you can get involved in is what?
That's a great question, Elizabeth. You know, I think that the tar pit, as you say, you know, one big obstacle is just overthinking. You know, when you go in and you're a beginner or at any stage of the process, really, you have a vision in your mind of what you want to make. And you can often get hung up on details and you know, things on the periphery. I know I fall victim to this a lot too, which can actually hamper what you're doing. So, you know, the advice I would give is to just go and experiment and make mistakes and screw up, and you'll ultimately learn. I think that's the way to learn. How about you other guys?
So don't overthink. I love that. It artistically speaking, I love that. Oh, so right. Michael, can you tell a young budding filmmaker out there, you know, the biggest morass that he or she could get involved in?
I would say the first essential thing is story. You need to have a good story. We're so fortunate right now that the technical aspect of filmmaking is super accessible. You can make a movie with your iPhone. The key is have a clear story, know what you want to say, beginning, middle, and an end, and execute that, and don't get lost in the forest. So I think the tendency is to, you know, start, oh, this could be a story, but I'm not sure where it's going. That is very likely to lead you down a labyrinth of who knows where you're going to end up.
So when you, Michael, design a story, do you storyboard it? Do you write it out? How do you conceive it?
Gosh, I've been doing this a long time now, and I was a screenwriter in Hollywood for almost 30 years. So story is kind of my 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 main concern. And I think you just need to, I mean, the easiest way to do it is think in 3 sentences. The beginning, the middle, and the end. It's very simple. It's sonata form. It's the golden mean. It's been around since the Greeks. If you can have those 3 parameters clear in your head, I think you've got something to begin with. You don't need to have all the details mapped out. You just need to know what those big steps are and then try and execute them clearly.
So I'm going to ask 2 questions here. Number 1 is, which is more important, the beginning, middle, or the end? And the second question is, in your film, what took you the longest to work out, the beginning, middle, or the end?
I would say in some ways the end is the most important, because in the end you are you kind of you crystallize everything that the story is about. Ideally, the premise of the film comes across clearly in the end, and that's what you've been building towards. So sometimes as a screenwriter, I would write the end first, and I would know, okay, that's where I'm going, and that helps a lot. In the case of Bruce's film, we knew that there was this wonderful story of this guitarist who was playing in a public garage, which is a very unusual thing. We knew that he was also an ICU nurse, which people really can't expect. And the third thing that really makes the story interesting is that he was kicked out by the parking lot authorities, and that through a public outcry of Santa Barbara, grassroots movement, he was brought back and given a special particular permit just for him because the public loved him. That was the story. The story was an unsung hero, when he disappears, suddenly realizes just how much he is loved and is brought back into the fold. That was the climax. That's really what the story was aiming towards.
So the end for you is that was how you navigated the film. You knew what the ending was going to look like. You knew it was going to be a victory of some sort over a battle, good and evil kind of thing, very archetypal. So got it. So I'd like to ask John, same question. So John, you've got a young beginning filmmaker, in the big morass that they can't avoid, with your wise counsel would be what?
Raising the money. But I'll address the other 2 points the other 2 filmmakers made, because they're excellent. One, overthinking. The subject of my film, Ray Bradbury, worked in that very way. He would not overthink his work when he wrote. He would wake up in the morning with the theater of his mind going on in his head, and he would race to his typewriter to get it down before he overthought it. And by noon, he had the beginnings of a story. And then in the afternoon, he would clean it up. But he would not stop to do that as he was working, because he said, thinking is the enemy to creativity. You just go on emotion and you do what your characters are telling you, because your characters are speaking the truth and you just have to listen to them and follow them. Second point was story. That's excellent. You have to have a good story. You have to have something that the audience is going to like immediately. Audiences these days have short attention spans, especially with really short films and these 5-minute movies on YouTube. If people are not interested or not into a story in the first minute, often they don't finish it. So you have to grab someone's attention immediately. So I would say a strong beginning is really important, but a strong finish will ultimately show the film as a success. And you can get away with a weak middle if you have those 2 things, but you better have both those things for sure. But for me, the primary thing is always dialogue, because dialogue brings the characters to life. And I like to write believable dialogue. I've done 4 films, and I've done rewrites on scripts that were given me to shoot because the dialogue was not believable. And you have to have believable characters. And if they talk like they're reading off a script, the audience doesn't buy it. That's why I love the work of Woody Allen, because his dialogue is so free-flowing. It's almost like you feel you're not in a movie. You feel like you're just watching people in real life. And the dialogue better sound like that. So that's what it is for me. But really, to get off the ground, it's raising money. That's the hardest thing.
So there's my dog. He's agreeing with you. Richard, what I want to do is I want to go to break because I want to check in with Chris that we've got the audio working for Chris.
We got the audio now.
Oh, you got it. Good. Okay. So when we get back from the break, what I want to talk with actually Chris and Michael about, John about, is this very interesting comment that that John just made. So thinking is the enemy of creativity. And then he talked about the importance of narrative and the importance of the spoken word. So my question for John would be, so in this particular film, Father Electrico, your creativity it's not exemplified by the spoken word, it's exemplified by the visual language of Chris's work. And I wonder how you made that flip, having said what you just said. So when we get back from the break, I would love to hear you talk about that. And Richard, let's go to a quick break. And just a shout out, I asked our filmmakers to show me, actually, not show me, but let me hear some of the film's music. And Richard has compiled the ins and outs of the show today with some of the music that the filmmakers have sent me. So enjoy that. We're going to go to quick break and then we're back. Just to shout out again, the 21st annual Ojai Film Festival happening November 6th to the 15th. Don't turn that down. Back with that. We've got Chris for
Right,
sure.
you're clear.
Okay.
People always ask. Hello, everybody. Sorry, I was a little.
No worries, no worries. Glad you're with us vocally. And I have to tell you guys, this is going to be quite an education for me. I'm not making films, but I just started as of July video editing. And I got to tell you, I thought in the 41 years I've been in this business, I loved audio editing. Unbelievable. It's fantastic. And I ran into a glitch yesterday where it wouldn't export, wouldn't process or mix down. And there was one image, and I think it was either a corrupt image or the file name the system just couldn't handle, and it would lock up over and over and over again. Finally, I deleted it and poof, everything was fixed. So it's amazing the stuff you find out as you're going.
What program are you using, Richard?
Filmora.
Nice.
I've heard of not Second Cut, Final Cut. A little expensive for me right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm using it on a Windows 7 computer here at the station. It doesn't have a separate graphics card, all that stuff. So I'm still in the process of looking for a video editing computer to really go to town with this stuff. But oh my God, I was doing a certain effect with one part of the program. I think it was transformation. No, it was text. It was text windows, and went to split screens, and I accomplished exactly the same thing I wanted, only much more efficiently than with the text forms. And I've also been involved, as Elizabeth knows, in Zoom theater. I've got an actor and director who has plays he writes. We just did, was it Tennyson? Oh, what the hell was the name of the movie? The play now. Can't remember the name of the play off the top of my head. Anyway, we record most of them. Then I will put all the stuff in, sound effects and so forth. Oh my God, it's just, and and again, I say this humbly, without ego, I'm in awe of what I'm watching. It's just like, wow, I did that? Really? Unbelievable.
Yeah, a good editor can.
That was the most humble thing you ever said, Richard.
There you go. No, I really am interested. So I want to get Chris in the conversation when we come back from the break. So John's going to explain why he chose visual literacy versus spoken word literacy and how Chris impacted that decision.
All right, well, here we go. In 3, 2, 1, you're live.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart, and we're talking with filmmakers that are participating, whose films are in the Ojai Film Festival, the 6th through the 15th. And when we went to break, I was just about to ask John Sasser to speak a little bit about his comment. Now, let's just rephrase what my question was. So John had said that story was very important, that he actually came from story, that he actually was hired many times to redo the narrative in various people's. And then the same time, his film involves a visual artist who's with us today. And I want to talk a little bit about Christopher Sladov's participation in the film and why John chose the visual literacy of creativity to carry the film. So let's have a quick conversation with John about that. So John, why?
Okay. Yeah, just to finish up what we were saying earlier about overthinking, a filmmaker friend of ours named Irvin Kershner always gave that advice. He says, you'll never get it just like you want it. He said, just finish it. So that was good advice, I think. And as for why we chose this particular means is because I don't really know exactly how something's going to turn out. If it's a documentary, that is. If it's a scripted film, then I'm going to have a really good idea. But if it's a documentary, I use the machine gun style of filmmaking and just shoot everything and see what looks good. And this is obviously a film about art. So I think all along it was going to be an art film. And it was going to be more about imagery. There was going to be a story tied to it, which Bradbury tells the story by which the statue came into existence. He tells the whole story in the film. So you have that, and that's important to know. But really, it's an art film. So it's all about the images that the artist puts into the statue and why those images are important and how they relate to Bradbury's life. So it's really an art film and it's really an image film. Every film could be different, and this just happens to be one where the visual was at the forefront.
Okay, so a question for Chris now. Chris Sladov is our artist here. So just so that listeners understand what the impetus or the inspiration was for both the film and Chris's sculpture. So Ray Bradbury, our beloved local hero, when he was 13 years old, he attended back-to-back 2 circuses. And, you know, that kind of imaginative mind kind of burnt itself out as, you know, it will happen at the age of 13 to a little young genius. And his dad, Ray's dad, actually carried him, took Ray up and carried him as he kind of was sleeping, exhausted from all of the visual noise and delectation that he was seeing at these 2 circuses. And so the film, to me, is this now, it's a metaphor for the creative process, because, you know, the being carried in the patriarch's arms is sort of like being carried into the waves of your imagination. And so that was the beginning of Ray's mature life, I think, as I was reading, I'm trying to research for this hour. But I guess my question for Chris is twofold. Number one, Chris, you know, what we're seeing recently is the importance of sculpture in our political discourse, because so many people are ripping down sculptures that, I mean, at the base of it, this is just an amazing thing for me as an appraiser. At the base of it, they are just a lost wax technique of metal pouring, but they symbolize something because they're close to the human form. And so you've chosen the human form as your palette. And so now this particular sculpture is a beautiful, a mature male carrying a young 13-year-old boy. On the back of the sculpture, we see the tattoos from Ray's Illustrated Man, and the tattoos are speaking, but they're also pouring into the young man's skin as well. So I guess, and of course, John's film, Father Electrico, is documenting that process. So Where did you come up with this inspiration?
Well, it does say it in the film, but I wanted to do his portrait, and Ray's like, no, we could do something much more imaginative than that. And he loved the Pietà that I had sculpted down in Mission San Luis Rey, and he suggested this and that, and the Martian holding him and things like that. And then he called me and he said, and told me the story of when his father, a story that he'd written countless stories, but he hadn't remembered this from his childhood, and so he told it to me, and that was it. We just we went to town on it. But there is that element, exactly what if Ray Bradbury is carrying you, the creativity creeps down into you. It was. We met on a level of, because I'm a sculptor, he's a writer, we met on just that field of creativity. The idea of the never-ending stories, the constantly wanting to change. And as for your point about today, what an incredible time to be a figurative sculptor.
Yes.
Everyone is calling me and making, asinine jokes. Call this group or that group walking around one of your sculptures. But the reality is for the first time in a very long time, they're looking at the sculptures and they're looking at who's depicted. In my education and all of that, everything was about how it fit into the history of art and all of that. But the work should primarily be what it is. And there's a return to that. And that will bring love.
Yeah, I noticed that, in looking at your work, I was just wanting to bring that up, that our return to figurative portrayal is beyond now the art form itself, and it actually symbolizes something in the collective culture. And so, it's a very early return. Dare I say, Ball, for example, where the figure becomes the message and not necessarily the culture. So it's a super interesting time, and I think this film is very prescient about that, even though it's not in the textual, part of the film. I want to talk a little bit with Michael, because Michael loves film, State Street Serenade. I want to talk a little bit about his use of, like we talked with John Sasser about use of another language. So you're using music. John used the visual literacy of Chris. Now Michael's using the musical literacy of Bruce. And so I want to talk a little bit about those two creative artists, Bruce and Michael, meeting on that platform as John and Chris, and then coincidentally, Ray Bradbury met on that platform. And so, Richard, maybe should we go to quick break? Let's go to quick break, and then I'd like to hear from Michael and Bruce on that creative platform, the oral creative platform, and how that impacted Michael's choices in the film. Don't turn that down. Just another shout out, Ojai 21st Annual Film Festival, and I have with us today some wonderful filmmakers whose films are in the festival. It's virtual, it's cheap, and it's really a treat. I've got John Sasser, filmmaker of Father Electrico. Ray Bradbury Lives Forever. Christopher, of course, is the artist, Christopher Sledoff, that's featured in that film. Matthew Schimmel, filmmakers of My Father's Bicycle Instagram. Michael Love, filmmaker of State Street Serenade, and also Bruce Goldish, who's with us, also the musician featured in that film. So don't turn that down. Back in a minute with these wonderful filmmakers.
You are clear.
All right.
Thank you for including me. The artist usually is not included. It's as a filmmaker.
Well, like
Often the writer is not included as the filmmaker.
Oh, yeah, you actually had a word. Mr. Invisible.
Well,
Yeah.
it's just a great time to be who you guys are, because film is the modern myth of today. And so, you know, we've got this whole, and it's really become so clear because, you know, I don't know how many of my friends are like, oh, I'm laying in bed at 2 a.m. I'm watching this film. It's the time that people are speaking through the films that they watch. So, I mean, what else is there to do? We can't be out there, you know, flying to Europe these days. So, yeah. So I think, yeah, it's a great time to be a filmmaker because you're carrying the weight, you know, of our imagination right now in this pandemic.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's also challenging to make a film right now.
Oh, let's talk about that a little bit. So yeah, maybe Michael, you can talk about that. Were you in production during the pandemic on this film?
Not the Bruce film, no.
No, okay. And Bruce, take yourself off mute. Yeah, because we want to talk together when you guys get back. And is there a question that I should be asking you guys and I'm not asking?
I don't think so. I think you're doing an amazing job, Elizabeth.
I'm happy.
Elizabeth, there is that one question you always forget to ask the guys.
Yeah.
Who cuts your hair, man?
Oh, yeah.
Nobody.
You know who cuts mine.
Pandemic. I don't let anyone near my face.
All right, stand by. We are coming back in 3, 2, 1. You're live.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart. I have the great honor of speaking with filmmakers that, you know, their amazing films are in the Ojai Film Festival, the 21st annual, November 6th through the 15th. I have John Sasser, Christopher Slatoff, who's a visual artist, Matthew Schimmel, Michael Love, and Bruce Goldish with me. And when we finished this last segment, I was making a parallel between John Sasser's film, Father Electrico, using the visual language of Chris as a sculptor, Christopher Slatoff's work. He's done a beautiful 8-foot tall image of Ray's father and young Ray Bradbury. And so I was making a parallel between Michael Love's choice in his film, State Street Serenade, to focus on the oral world, the musical world of Bruce Goldish. So how did you two come up with this, and what role does music play in State Street Serenade?
I think music is really sort of the critical through line for our film. Most people who've lived in Santa Barbara for a while have experienced this mesmerizing, echoing, beautiful guitar music, very unique style that flows for a couple of blocks over a nocturnal State Street. Sometimes it'll be out there on a cloudy, moody night. Sometimes it'll be in a perfect, clear Christmas Eve. And often people have no clue where this music is coming from, whether it's coming from a recording, and a few people actually ferret out Bruce, who's up in the upper story of the parking lot, and there's a lot of in his journals that people write, I found you, I finally found you. And I was one of those people, and Bruce and I talked about making a documentary about what he was doing, because I thought it was truly magical for, I'm afraid, a few years. And the project was coincident with some other things I was filming. So it did take about 3 years to make, but the music really is the through line that carries the atmosphere and I think the beauty of the gifts that Bruce is giving. And I think that it's very telling that right now he's in the ICU dealing with COVID patients, and then gets out into play in public and is able to release some of that energy that he has to deal with there. So I'd like to pass this to Bruce, because his story of playing there is really quite a unique and phenomenal thing that has happened.
Okay, so we are on radio now, which is an interesting medium, but you know, the interesting thing is that Michael Love was just talking about all the people that tried to find Bruce, because we all heard that beautiful music, and my partner John is a professional photographer, and so he tried to find Bruce, and I've got a picture here John took that years ago when he's trying to find Bruce. There's John's picture. But I just thought, how interesting that you're talking about finding, it's a metaphor for finding creativity in the most unlikely place, which is a multi-story car park. And so Bruce, tell us a little bit about working with Michael.
I love that Michael's so earthy and a mix of earthy and genius. So he's easy to work with, and I can just lay back and let him do his magic. That's so impressive to me. I can play some music, but to do the medium of filming and editing is, if I had a hat, it'd be off to you. I'm lucky.
So just a little quick word, diverting from the creativity angle, although it's not completely diversion. How are things in the ICU ward with the COVID patients these days?
There's waves. It was we have a special unit devoted just for COVID because of, keep them in isolation. And there were points when it was full and we were getting ready to spill over into special units that we have set up at Cottage Hospital for overflow. And then it's right now, in the last few days, it's waned, where the COVID unit in the ICU was nearly empty. So it varies, and we're gearing up. I think we'll get another wave.
I was just wondering, this is another off topic, but I was interviewing Kostas Protopappas the other day about he's a director of our opera here, that he's formed a committee of really important names musically and otherwise in the city to speak to the council about street music. And, in our pandemic, there's been tremendous kind of clampdown on street music and street musicians and any kind of street performances. What do you think about that, Bruce? Because you're a double-edged sword now. You've seen up close and personal the COVID issues, and you are also a street musician. So what do you have to say about that?
Street music is actually almost another category than the regular live music. If I was playing in a club like Soho, it's enclosed. That's a huge thing. Just the fact of being indoors, or if people are close to each other. So outdoors, I think that they could make accommodations, and I'm sure it's tricky because you want to try to generalize a rule that'll work for everybody, and yet there's going to be specific circumstances that'll make things work or not work. And if you're just even, so that would be, you could have an official stage outdoors, maybe that would be sensible, but would work well. Or right now, if you play on the street in general, if you're able to stay away from people, which is generally the case, you're usually 10 feet away from anybody and you're outdoors. The safety issue isn't really so much the issue. Because I'm as popular as like Bruce Springsteen, there tends to be thousands of people trying to get up to me, but I do my best. Not really.
Right. So Richard's giving a sign. We got to go to quick break, but when we get back, I want to point out another parallel between our filmmakers today, which is that John and Chris's film, Father Electrico, is about patriarchy and the idea of the strong male. Matthew's film is about patriarchy in a funny way, because he's addressing his father's, eternal youth, I could say, watching that. And I want to hear a little bit about Matthew's challenge, because if I was thinking to myself watching that film, Matthew, if my mother is a concert pianist, and I was thinking if I documented her life, what a struggle that would be, because my mother would tell me what I should be doing as a creative artist. And you see, so I'm wondering what it was like to actually have your father as the subject of your film, My Father's Bicycle Instagram, and what was like to go into the garages and on the streets and this sort of thing with your dad, because you're the creative filmmaker. How did your dad try to be your dad. So Richard, let's go to quick break. When we get back, Michael Schimmel's going to tell us how his dad did or did not try to be his dad during the making of My Father's Bicycle Instagram. Don't turn that down. Back in a minute.
Okay, you are clear. By the way, I have to say there, we were talking on a program just yesterday about what some people would consider the worst movie that we thought was really good. And I don't know if you've heard of the movie Mine, M-I-N-E, but I thought it was a great movie. It's sort of a pseudo-military film.
Never heard of it.
Well, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it has to do with a soldier who comes across what could be considered to be the enemy. And he's just sitting there. Doesn't know why he's just sitting there. He just is. Finally, he begins to realize, and they have the communication problem, different languages, that the guy is sitting on a mine. So he goes over to try to help him dig around it. They actually trade places. And the rest of the film is the soldiers' dealings now with this gentleman and his new situation.
That sounds like a very interesting premise.
Well, it really, and what was interesting was I recommended it to one of our programmers here because we're always talking about the stuff we watch on demand. And he came back after watching this. Don't you ever recommend a movie to me again. But I never believe the critics. I never trust them. I don't like them because they never tell you the truth. 9 times out of 10, the critics usually are wrong. Or let's put it this way. If they don't like it, I usually do. If they do like it, I usually don't.
And I just sign in here about art critics. Always remember that art critics have a vested interest in an art that needs to be explained to people. If it is understood, there's no reason for them to be there.
You're absolutely.
The old expression.
I like Marshall McLuhan, who they did a satire with Stan Freberg, who said he was doing the bit, and he says, "I'm coming out with a new book. It's an explanation of my first book. I'm working on another book, an explanation of the explanation." All right, Elizabeth, here we go. In 3, 2, 1, you're live.
Welcome back. I'm talking with filmmakers from the Ojai Film Festival, the 21st annual, can you believe 21st, November 6th through the 15th. And we're talking with John Sasser, filmmaker of Father Electrico, Ray Bradbury Lives Forever, and the artist featured in that film who's creating a sculpture as we watch the film, Christopher Sladoff, of Ray being carried by his father. It's a metaphor for the waves of imagination that Ray has brought to us. Matthew Schimmel, filmmakers of My Father's Bicycle Instagram, Michael Love, filmmaker of State Street Serenade, and the subject of his film, Bruce Goldish, is here today. When we went to break, I was pointing out that many of the films that are offered these days have some kind of theme with the older patriarch. And sort of, the way the patriarch introduces the wisdom of manhood to the young protagonist. And we're talking about the idea with John Sasser of his film of, the idea of Ray Bradbury's dad carrying Ray after he's exhausted by his first wave of creativity. And Matthew's film, My Father's Bicycle Instagram, is a love letter to his dad's eternal youth in a way that, his dad is not a young man and he's continuing to groom and perfect his bicycle abilities and bicycles themselves, the pictures of the bicycle throughout all kinds of trips that his dad has done. And my question for Matthew was, when was your dad being your dad, and when was your dad being your subject?
That's a great question. So like a lot of the filmmakers here, my father's bicycles Instagram is kind of, secretly a short documentary about art making, because my dad spends his retirement taking very carefully composed pictures of his bicycle, posting them on Instagram. But unlike a lot of the filmmakers here today, I had a subject who was not afraid to tell me he was done filming, that he didn't want to do it anymore, that he was uncomfortable. And I had to remind him, oh, you have to repeat some of these actions so I can film it and we can edit it together. But, on the flip side of that, he's listening right now, so I'm teasing him. On the flip side of that, it also allowed me a subject that I'm very intimate with, and we're able to sort of talk about our day-to-day lives, our hobbies, our passions, and what they mean to us. So, it's both sides of the coin.
Was he critical?
Critical of the movie? Well, he, even to this day, asks why I made a movie about him. He doesn't think that it's very interesting. He calls himself an average Joe. And that's one of the reasons I think it's a compelling story. I think it's relatable to all of us. We all have things that we do in our spare time that give us meaning. And for him, it's taking pictures of his bicycle and posting them to Instagram.
And the metaphor of the bicycle, so wasn't lost on me. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, he's biked all of his life, and he candidly told me, the beauty of the bike is that it takes you places and that you power it. It's kind of a metaphor for your own ability. My dad is a very do-it-yourselfer kind of person. And so now that, he's retired and he's got more time, he's also taking on the hobby of photography, teaching himself, doing it yourself, and taking those pictures. So, that kind of ethos also spreads to my documentary. It's DIY. We shot it over the course of 3 or 4 days around Christmas of last year, in garages, on streets in Ventura. So it all kind of gelled together.
So I want to actually focus a little bit with John Sasser on this idea of portraying a creative genius. And when Richard, we can go to a quick break, but John, I want to hear your words on how you get your hands around portraying two creative geniuses in your film, the Ray and Christopher Slatter, who's actually with us. Christopher Slatoff is the sculptor that's featured in your film. So you as a creator are portraying two creative geniuses. And I wondered how you handled that hot potato. And I wonder if you could talk with us a little bit about you're working with great creative minds in your film when we get back from the break. Can you do that for us, John? Yeah, okay. Do not turn that down. I am honored to be interviewing filmmakers from this 21st annual Ojai Film Festival. I have John Sasser, Matthew Schimmel, Michael Love. I also have the subject of John Sasser's film, Christopher Slatoff. I have the subject of Michael Love's film, Bruce Goldish, a beloved musician that perches up above State Street. And you have heard him if you've lived in this town. Do not turn that dial. Back in a sec.
You're clear.
All right. Now your dad is so dear, Michael or Matthew. It's
Yeah.
Clearly did not like being interviewed the first couple. It was like, no, where's this gonna go? Because the guy is just not having it.
Yeah.
He's like,
Yeah. Yeah. And eventually he opens up, and that's sort of the arc of the movie, is digging into the emotions of this, and then it's done. But I filmed with him before, and he does take a while to warm up. But he's charismatic. He's got a nice personality. I think that comes across.
Don't think just because he was your dad, interviewing me was no day at the beach.
Well, John gets to tell us all the dirty secrets, Chris.
I can be difficult.
So you're not hearing the music, but the listeners are. And then I will send you guys after the show a link. Richard will put it together for you guys. And so I think, Richard, can you also send the guys the video?
Well, as I always do, Elizabeth, I put it up on my Google Drive, and I send you a link. If you'll send me their emails, I'll send them a link to it also.
Okay, so you'll have the, and so once you get that, the audio and the visual, you can use it however you want. My agreement with the station is that they don't pay me, but my artists that are on my show get the, the footage. So if there's anything that's said that you want to use, please do in any format you want.
Okay, we're coming back. You have 7:30, 7 minutes, 30 seconds in 3, 2, 1, you're live.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart, and I'm talking with artists and filmmakers from the Ojai Film Festival, the 21st annual. We are virtual. The Ojai Film Festival is virtual this year, November 6th through the 15th. And by the way, you can purchase individual blocks for as little as $10 on this, and it's totally wonderful. We were talking with John Sasser before the break, and his film, Father Electrico, Ray Bradbury Lives Forever. The featured artist in his film, Christopher Sladoff, is also with us today. And my question for John was, you are working with and telling the story of two creative geniuses. How'd you do it?
Ray and Chris wanted to do a documentary of the creative process of the film, and they were talking one day about it, and Ray said to Chris, "Why don't you get John Sasser?" Because I had worked with Ray on a film previously, and he remembered me. And so Chris asked me, and I said, "I'd love to do it." And the way you do it successfully is you shoot everything that the creative geniuses are doing, because you can't direct someone like a Bradbury, you just enjoy them. So yeah, I just pretty much let them do what they did, and I tried to make it look artistic in a film and tell a cohesive story about what happened and why. But it's a great father and son film. The model for young Ray was Christopher's own son, so there's a father-son connection there. And of course, we've been talking about the story where the statue is Ray and his father. And it was a great story. And Ray was very close to his father, and there's a great story he tells in the film about in 1953, I believe it was, when he was going to go to Ireland with John Huston for a year and write the screenplay for Moby Dick. His father came to him and he thought he wouldn't see him for a whole year, and he says, "I want to give you this gold pocket watch that was my father's." And it meant a lot to him. And he says, I might not see you for a year, so I want to give this to you. And it was very emotional for him. And that pocket watch actually made its way under the back of the statue as well. So there's a really strong connection of father and sons in this. And you can tell in Ray's voice if you watch the film, when he's telling about all of his books are the conversations between he and his father and he and his grandfather.
Chris, John is just telling us that your son was modeled for Ray.
Well, everything was perfect. My son was the exact age that we're talking about. In fact, somebody said, "Well, my goodness, you sure made the little boy look exactly like you." And then they saw my son. Oh, he looks exactly like your son. Yes, it's about fathers and sons. I think John is really good in bringing out that aspect of, I had lost a very powerful father back in 2000. And the only man I ever met that was close was Ray Bradbury. I mean, just an incredible character, and very fatherly. He was the biggest problem I have with getting as old as I am. Questions of and get their wisdom. They're getting really thin. I'm having trouble finding them, and now I've got younger guys coming to ask me questions.
So you're a mentor now. You're an elder and a mentor now in your industry, and so yeah, you have to act accordingly, I guess. So I say that again.
It's a great joy bringing younger sculptors in and speaking with them and even teaming up with them. I truly love that.
So I want to switch. Richard, we don't have to go to another break. We have 3 minutes for the show. Michael, I want you to talk a little bit. Michael Love, I want you to talk a little bit about State Street Serenade, and I want you to talk a little bit about the setting itself. So the various settings that you chose for the film. Obviously, we had to have one, which was the car park. But tell me a little bit about those choices.
Well, we were trying to play with the hidden aspect of Bruce and his influence from afar, and how humble he is about what he's done for 12 years now in the parking lot. And so there were, images that we want to illustrate that, and sometimes it's just people walking down on State Street who are trying to figure out where he is. And then you see people in the parking lot that are coming back from a movie, and they're like, oh, and they actually see him. But the mystery of finding him was one thing we wanted to play with. And in addition to that, I wanted to get firsthand accounts of other people who were influenced and who loved his music and who knew the story, the long-term story of how he was kicked out and brought back. So one of the images that was most critical for me was the journal pages that people have written in for 12 years. And there's so many amazing entries there that it was really hard to select the ones that I did. But there were often things where people would say, I was feeling suicidal and I came in there and you changed the whole trajectory of my night, of my life. I'm not kidding. There's really some powerful, powerful stuff. So I think Bruce is an unsung hero in that regard as a musical therapist for all of State Street. And then in addition, he gives a lot in the ICU. And this is probably one of the most humble guys that you'll ever meet. So I felt like I wanted to depict as much of that as I could in the film. There's a lot of music in the film, which is intercut with the story axis, but I think that Bruce is really the center.
Well, thank you all. More information, ojaifilmfestival.com, November 6th through 11th. It's great virtual festival of 77 films. Don't miss it, guys. Thank you.
All right, you're clear. You are clear. Go for it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. So I'll send you Richard, I'll send you everybody's emails, and then
yes.
with this. And thank you so much, everybody. I sure appreciate your time this morning.